Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are uncovering a seriously surprising transformation. We're going to trace the rich, historical journey of Freemasonry's musical life and how it completely shifted from these incredibly boisterous tavern songs to the solemn hymns of later eras. So, let's dive right into this fascinating shift in history and explore how a society's music transformed right alongside its public image. When you picture Freemasonry today, you're probably thinking of quiet, formal, maybe even a little mysterious meetings, right? Well, I want you to completely scratch that image for a second. Imagine it's 1725 in London. You walk into a smoky tavern. Upstairs, in a private room, men have pushed all the tables together. They've just wrapped up a serious ceremony, and now the wine comes out. Someone stands up for a toast, and suddenly the entire room is singing, loudly, enthusiastically, and honestly, being off-key was perfectly fine. For its first 100 years, Freemasonry was anything but quiet. It was actually one of the most musical, public, and lively clubs in the English-speaking world. Section 1. The Boisterous Tavern Years. Eating, drinking, and singing as ritual. You see, those early groups, like the famous Goose and Gridiron in London, they weren't meeting in grand, dedicated temples. They met in taverns and alehouses. The serious ceremonies and the raucous feasts literally shared the exact same long table. Eating and drinking weren't just the after-party. They were an integral part of the meeting itself. These table lodges, or festive boards, were entirely structural to the society. They anchored their whole calendar around two massive public parties, St. John the Baptist Day in June and St. John the Evangelist Day in December. They do this grand procession to church and then return for a formal dinner where toasts and songs were built right into the agenda. The surviving lodge bills from this era are absolutely incredible. They show massive orders for wine, punch, and tobacco. In fact, you even see historical records of lodge masters getting formally reprimanded for overspending on the festivities. Now consider the 18th century definition of a very specific word: harmony. If you read through the handwritten minute books from these early lodges, this word pops up over and over again. The minutes would literally say, the lodge was closed, and the brethren partook of dinner and enjoyed harmony. In this context, harmony meant communal singing. It wasn't just pleasant background music, it was the essential structural work of making men into brothers. It created this temporary joyous equality where outside rank simply did not matter. So to give you an idea of how these songs were actually used, listen to this quote from the Enter and Apprentice's song. It was written by Matthew Birkhead for the very first Masonic rulebook, Anderson's Constitutions, back in 1723. It goes, "Great kings, dukes, and lords have laid by their swords. No mortal can more the ladies adore than a free and an accepted Mason." Think about what that meant when belted out in a tavern. It basically functioned as the ultimate 18th century classified ad. Way before widespread newspaper advertising, you grew your club by singing about its prestige, bragging that kings wanted to join, and women adored you. And communal singing became a massive civic asset because of this. It was wildly successful. It led to dozens of songbooks being published. Anderson's 1723 Constitutions paved the way for sure. But then you had a 1751 Irish songbook that dedicated 35 entire pages solely to songs. And a 1756 Ahamon Rezon, that was more than half music and poetry. There was even a 1725 lodge with a very long Latin name, the Philo Musicae et Architecturae Societate Pluni, whose explicit literal purpose was just to sing. These books taught history, they taught hierarchy, and they boasted about this ancient noble club to anyone who would listen. Section 2. The 1826 Turning Point and the William Morgan Affair. But, history rarely moves in a straight line, and things were about to take a really tense, dark turn. In the summer of 1826 in Batavia, New York, a disgruntled former Mason named William Morgan partnered up with a local newspaper owner. He threatened to publish a book revealing all of the society's secrets. The events that followed played out exactly like a true crime mystery. On August 9th, a local lodge panicked and placed a counter-ad in the Ontario Messenger, calling Morgan a swindler. Then, on September 11th, Morgan was arrested in Canandaigua for a minor debt. That very night, a group of Masons took Morgan from the jail. He was never seen alive again. The prevailing rumor was that he was drowned in the Niagara River. Regardless of his actual fate, this nighttime disappearance triggered an absolute explosion of public outrage. Section 3. The Fall of Freemasonry. From Civic Asset to Secret Conspiracy. Just weeks before all this happened, newspapers were proudly listing lodge meetings right next to 4th of July celebrations. They were praising members as respectable pillars of the community. But almost overnight, that exact same press began condemning Freemasonry. They painted it as a dangerous, aristocratic, secret conspiracy plotting against families, against Christianity, and against the Republic itself. The data from this time is absolutely devastating, and it shows exactly how fast public opinion turned. In 1826, there were about 480 active lodges in New York, boasting around 20,000 members. By 1835, less than 10 years later, that number plummeted to a maximum of 75 active lodges. That is a staggering 85 to 90% collapse. And this wasn't just a local New York problem either. It was a full-blown national panic. Before 1826, there were an estimated 100,000 Masons nationally. Within a decade, more than half of them had vanished. Massachusetts fell from 108 lodges down to 56. The Vermont Grand Lodge actually had to shut down completely for a period. But here is a really fascinating detail. Out of hundreds of failing lodges, very few actually formally surrendered their charters. Instead, they just went dark. They took their charters, hid them in a drawer, and quietly fought for sheer survival, just waiting out the storm. Section 4, From Tavern to Hymn, the Musical Shift. Think about it. If your society is suddenly being viewed by the public as a dangerous, secret aristocracy, you're definitely going to stop roaring at the top of your lungs in public taverns, right? You don't want to draw any extra attention to yourselves. So, to protect themselves from this immense public scrutiny, Masons completely changed their culture. The loud drinking songs, the public toasts, the tavern roaring of the 1700s, they were just gone, vanished. Instead, they traded them in for careful, standardized, solemn hymns. They became quiet. They became deeply formal. The music didn't die out entirely, but it narrowed significantly to reflect a much more cautious, private organization. This shift meant that music became strictly regulated through solemn, standardized, printed books. Over in America, you had the Masonic minstrel in 1816, followed later by the Masonic harp in 1858, and the Masonic choir in 1864. In England, the Freemasons' melody from 1818 really set the tone, and it was later rescued by a man named W.S. Barlow in his 1885 collection, Masonic Songs Old and New. Interestingly enough, if you attend a formal English festive board today, there is a very good chance you are still singing, directly from Barlow's highly formal 1885 reprint. Yet, despite that massive chilling effect in 1826, some enduring classics absolutely survived. Robert Burns, who was a dedicated Mason, wrote Old Lang Syne for a Masonic meeting in Kilmarnock back in 1786, and obviously it's still sung at Burns Nights today. Traditions survived with songs like God Bless the Master and Hail to the Craft. We actually know this because minute books from the Ancient Lodge of Edinburgh all the way to the 1841 Frontier Nauvoo Lodge in Illinois consistently show that the practice of closing a meeting by sharing a song, by enjoying harmony, never truly disappeared. Which brings us to Section 5, the modern musical revival and reclaiming the lost fellowship. Fast forward to today. Over the decades, changing leisure habits, the rise of television, and much more business-like meetings have made those once ubiquitous lodge pianos basically go quiet. Today, our modern festive boards are perfectly polite, they have great conversation and nice toasts, but they're often missing that spontaneous musical bond that defined the society for centuries. But Brother Martin Bogardus of the New Jersey Lodge of Masonic Research and Education is actively breathing life back into this lost fellowship. He isn't trying to recreate 18th century tavern excess, but rather the principle of shared song. Through his YouTube channel, he's cultivated a playlist of over 100 songs. He is actively composing and arranging accessible, singable pieces ranging from Robert Burns settings to Appalachian-tinged and rousing Scott-style anthems, so that ordinary voices can once again roar together. A perfect example of this is a new track of his called Masonry Calling. It's this proud, rousing Scots folk anthem designed from the ground up to be sung over a dram at the table. It celebrates historical touchstones like Solomon's Temple and the Regius poem, but most importantly, it celebrates the pure joy of Freemasonry. It deliberately cultivates that ancient fellowship and shared bond that a simple speech or polite conversation simply cannot provide. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to reflect on the immense power of shared song. How does music change the way we bond with one another? I'd love for you to drop a comment below with your absolute favorite Masonic tune, old or new, before we listen to Masonry Calling. And definitely check out Martin's channel to collaborate on the future of this musical canon. So I'll leave you with this final thought. If the music we sing shapes the very nature of the community we build, What song will your community choose to sing tomorrow?